Hey there, makers and aspiring sewers. Welcome back to Stitch by Stitch, the podcast that's here to hold your hand through your sewing journey. Now, today we're going to be tackling a topic that can feel a bit like a secret language when you're starting out on your sewing journey. Today we're talking about fabrics. Okay, so let's take, for example, you walk into a fabric store and it's a riot of colors and textures, but also a lot of mystery tags. Rayon, polyester, cotton lawns. What does it all mean? Well, wonder no more. In today's episode, I break down the basics so you can choose the right fabric for your projects and help you make smarter fabric choices. All right, set the scene. You have a super cute pattern for a simple tote bag or a beginner-friendly top. And the pattern says requires woven fabric or maybe good for knits. And you're thinking, is this woven? Is that a knit? And what's the difference? You see, it is totally normal to feel overwhelmed by the fabric choice. Fabric is a huge topic, but we're going to simplify it down to the absolute essentials you need to know as a beginner sewist. Now, the first thing, and probably the most important thing you need to know, is the distinction is between woven fabrics and knit fabrics. So let's start with woven fabrics. This is what I call the gridiron gang. So basically, imagine a little tiny grid like a tiny checkboard with woven fabrics are made by interlacing two sets of threads, one going lengthwise and that's typically called the warp, and the other going crosswise. So lengthwise and crosswise, which is called the weft. Think of it like a weaving basket. So now let's talk about the characteristics of woven fabric. Typically, woven fabrics have no stretch, and this is the biggest thing to remember. So if you pull woven fabric, it will usually have very little minimal stretch, or perhaps a little on the diagonal side, which is called the bias. Woven fabrics hold their shape very well. And because of their structure, the wovens are good for projects that need you to hold onto specific shapes. So if you have a project that has to have a specific shape, woven fabric is the best option. They have less fraying on the edge, and that's not to say that they never fray. They do, but generally the threads are pretty stable. Now let's talk about common woven fabrics for beginners. So we will start with quilting cotton. This is your best friend for starting out because it's inexpensive, stable, easy to cut, easy to sew, and doesn't fray too much. And that makes it perfect for pouches, tote bags, simple skirts, or even practicing garment making. Next, you have broadcloth. Now, broadcloth is similar to quilting cotton, but it's a bit lighter. So broadcloth is great for beginners, beginner garments, or home decor like throw pillows. There are the linen blends. Linen blends have a lovely natural look and texture, but they can wrinkle, and they wrinkle easily. A linen blend is almost more forgiving for beginners, and they are great for summer clothing. Now, let's get into common household fabrics known as chambray or denim. It is a lighter version of jean fabrics, and they get softer with each wash. So these are usually good for more structured garments, and an example is a blouse or dress. Finally, in our woven fabrics categories are canvas or duck cloth. Canvas fabrics are heavier and they are more durable wovens, and they are excellent for bags, sturdy totes, or home decor. Now let's talk about when to use wovens. Wovens are typically used when the pattern calls for structured items like button-up shirts, non-stretchy skirts, tailored pants, tote bags, pillows, quilts. A good rule of thumb is that if a pattern doesn't specify what fabric to use, assume it's for woven. Now let's discuss knit fabrics. So knit fabrics. Imagine you're knitting a scarf with needles. Knit fabrics are made from a single continuous yarn that's looped. Now, together, think of those interlocking versus you see in a knitted sweater. And here are the characteristics of knit fabrics. First, knit fabrics have stretch. This is their defining feature. They stretch a lot, usually in both directions. That's lengthwise and crosswise. Knit fabrics are comfortable, and that stretch makes them super comfy for clothing. Also, knit fabrics can curl along the edges. This sometimes makes it the main foe for beginners because the edges of the knits love to roll up. However, knit fabrics don't fray like woven fabrics when cut. This is primarily because they're loops. They can, however, unravel if a seam comes apart. Fret not, as a beginner sewist, you can still use knit fabrics. And here are the common knit fabrics for beginners. First, there is cotton jersey. This is what most t-shirts are made of. It's soft, it's stretchy, and relatively easy to work compared to other knits that you work with. Jersey is great for simple t-shirts or comfy dresses. Next, you have French terry. French terry has loops on the back like a towel, but is flat on the front. French terry is good for hoodies, sweatpants, or casual tops. Then you have rib knits. Rib knits have visible vertical ribs and a lot of stretch. So rib knits is also often used for neckbands, cuffs, and things like that. Now about when to use knits. You use knits when the pattern is for a t-shirt, for leggings, for active wear, for stretchy dresses, for pajamas, or anything that needs to hug the body or allow for a lot of movement. So, a common mistake beginners make when trying to sew a knit pattern with a woven fabric or vice versa. If you try to make a t-shirt and this is that's designed for stretchy knit out of quilting cotton, which is a non-stretchy woven, it simply wouldn't fit and you wouldn't be able to get it over your head. Similarly, if you try to make a structured tote bag out of a super stretchy knit, it'll likely be floppy and lose its shape. So, the golden rule of thumb here is always check for the pattern's fabric that's recommended. So, they tell you what kind of fabric you need for your specific project and design. How do you put this all into practice when you're at the fabric store? Step 1. Check your pattern first. What kind of fabric does it recommend? Woven or knit? Does it suggest specific fiber types? You need to know this. Step 2. Read the bolt end. Every roll of fabric called a bolt, and it will have a tag on the end that tells you the fiber content. 100% cotton, 95% cotton, 5% spandex, and often whether it's a woven or a knit. The hand test can also be used in step 3, and this refers to how a fabric feels. Touch it. Does it feel soft? Does it feel stiff, smooth, raw? Does it stretch? Does it drape nicely? And step 4, buy a little extra, especially as a beginner sewist. It's always a good idea to buy a little more fabric than your pattern calls for, just in case of mistakes or if you want to make a matching scrunchie. And don't be afraid to ask for help at the fabric store. Staff are usually very knowledgeable and they're always happy to guide you. So just tell them what you're trying to make and they'll be happy to help you. So there you have it. This was your crash course on fabric facts for beginner sewists. Remember, practice makes perfect. And the more you sew, the more intuitive the fabric choices will become. Start with those beginner-friendly wovens like quilting, cotton, which gets you a feel for how they behave, and then slowly introduce knits when you feel you are ready. Thank you for joining me on Stitch by Stitch. Keep experimenting, keep creating, and happy fabric exploring. I'll see you next time.